welcome everybody. My name is Andrea Miller and I'm a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator here at community hospitals and wellness centers. And today I have Rick Thornmeyer here. He's going to be my sous chef. He's graciously agreed to help me make our butternut squash quinoa salad. So the theme today is Live It Squashed. So it's an exciting day for me because squash just so happens to be my favorite food, which a lot of people think is kind of odd, but I can't get enough of it. And you could actually say that squash is probably the reason why I'm a dietitian. When I was younger in high school, I learned that squash was really good for performance. It's a good source of complex carbohydrates. So as a young cross-country runner, I forced my mom to make me squash every day before our cross-country meets. And I actually saw my performance really improve when I started incorporating nutritious foods like squash into my diet. And Rick, actually, his wife just so happens to be the cross-country coach at Bryan now, and he's an avid runner himself, I hear. He ran for Eastern.
I did.
Cross-country and track, so I didn't know that. I learned that about him today.
In my fitter days.
And Rick, I didn't tell you what he does here at the hospital. He's actually the director of maintenance here at the hospital. So he's going to help me learn to make squash. We're also going to learn about different types of squash today. We're going to do a squash 101, I guess, and learn about the different types and how to incorporate it into your diet. So first of all, we're going to get started with making our salad. And our first step is we have to start cooking our grain. So the grain, which is actually, we eat it as a grain, but it's not really a grain. It's actually the seed of a grass. It's quinoa. You said you've never had quinoa. Have you heard of quinoa?
Only when I walked in this room.
So quinoa is super nutritious for you. It's becoming more available now. It's a great source of protein, and it's actually a complex protein. It contains all of the amino acids that would be found in meat. And I think I said complex. I actually mean complete. Complete protein, all of the amino acids found in meat. So it takes about 15 minutes to cook, which is actually pretty quick for a grain. A lot of whole grains, like brown rice, for example, would take 45 minutes to cook. So 15 minutes is pretty good. Now quinoa, it has something that's naturally occurring on it called a bitter saponin. And it can kind of give it a bitter flavor. So if you haven't purchased already rinsed quinoa, you want to make sure you give it a rinse before you start cooking it. Just put it in like a mesh strainer and rinse it under water. But I believe, or I hope this is rinsed quinoa so it doesn't have a bitter flavor. So I have a cup of quinoa, and the general rule is you need a cup of quinoa and 2 cups of water when you're cooking quinoa. So I'm just going to add that in there. Give it a quick stir.
Where's quinoa grown?
Quinoa, I think it originated more in like South America. It's a staple down there. Then you want to go ahead and give it a cover. And before I cover it, I'm going to wait till it boils. Once it starts boiling, then you can cover it and let it simmer for about 15 minutes until it's tender and all the liquid is absorbed. So hopefully that comes to a boil here quickly. The next thing we're going to do is get started on our squash. So you said your family eats squash sometimes. You said you like spaghetti squash, which would be this one right here. What's the hardest part for you when you're preparing a squash?
I'd go with cutting it. It's
yes.
like a rock. It's hard.
It's like a rock. So a lot of people, that is the biggest challenge. How in the heck do you get this into cubes like the recipe calls for? First of all, you need a good knife. A good knife is essential at cutting a squash. If you're trying to use a paring knife or like a steak knife to cut a squash, it's just not going to work. You need a really good, sharp chef knife or cleaver to cut through this squash. And also we're going to peel it using a vegetable peeler. So obviously various types of squash. Some can be peeled, some can't. A butternut squash is one that can be peeled. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give it a start here. Whoops, not good to have a slippery cutting board. So it's actually not too difficult when you have the right type of knife to cut through a squash. So, and then I'm gonna use this top part right here. We need about 2.5 cups of squash, so actually this part should do it. I just want to show you the inside of it. If maybe you've never used a butternut squash before. A butternut squash is the sweetest, one of the sweetest types of squash. All squash have seeds in the middle. So if I was using this bulb part, I'd scrape the seeds out and then use the bulb. Don't throw these little tiny seeds away though. You can actually eat these too. Who roasts pumpkin seeds? Do you roast pumpkin seeds when you carve your pumpkin with your kids?
We do.
Yeah, so you can actually eat these just like you do pumpkin seeds. And I have the recipe on one of the handouts that I gave you to roast squash seeds. So all seeds of squashes are actually edible, and they have a lot of important nutrients in it, like minerals and different vitamins, iron. Pumpkin seeds are incredibly good sources of iron. So I'm not going to scrape the seeds out of that one. I'm just going to use this part, and I'm going to let Rick help me in peeling it and cutting it up. How are we doing there? Starting to boil. I really hope that there were 2 cups of water in this. Okay. It's kind of simmering. We'll give it another second. Okay, so I'm going to cut this in half to make it a little bit more manageable. Make sure your fingers are out of the way when you're actually pressing down with a knife. Okay, so I'm going to give half to Rick. And
Peel it first or keep it first?
so we are going to peel it first. So we're going to take our vegetable peeler, and you can do however makes it easiest for you, but sometimes holding it down on the cutting board and kind of peeling away from you. And this is it can be a bit of a challenge. Rick actually brought up a good point before we started today. You said that you use a paring knife a lot of times when you peel your vegetables, and that would actually be an acceptable method as well. So butternut squash generally, these aren't the sharpest vegetable peelers. Generally, you have to peel it. Oh, there we go. We're boiling. Don't boil over. And I turned it off. Oh no. These are kind of finicky to use, so hopefully.
Did you have that checked in by maintenance before you turned it on?
I don't know. Did you check it?
I'll have to defer
Did
to my
anybody
crew.
check it? Yeah, so kind of keep an eye on your quinoa and make sure. Oh, it turned off again. Maybe we need to have them checked by maintenance, huh?
It'll work properly afterwards.
That's right. Well, goodness. Okay, so yeah, peeling away from you. Again, this is probably the most challenging part. I think I was saying before I was distracted by my boiling quinoa. Some people do eat the skin on a butternut squash, but it is a little bit tough and slippery. So if there is a little bit of skin left on it, that should be okay. All right, good enough. So I'm going to get my peelings out of the way. Okay, now we're going to cube it, and I think I'm actually going to cut it in half to make it a little bit more manageable. So I cut the top part in half, and now I'm going to slice it in half the other way again, just to kind of make it easier to cube. There's really no wrong way to do this. You just need them in like bite-sized chunks. They don't necessarily have to be in squares, just about the same time, because you're going to roast them. So you want them all about the same size. So about like ½ inch, about that size.
Awesome.
Rick.
We can do that.
All right. Did everybody see the size? So, I mean, that's about the size you'd want to take in a bite. We're still cooking over there. All right. So this squash we're actually going to roast in an oven. We're going to roast it with some red onion. And roasting really brings out the sweetness in a butternut squash. I mentioned that butternut squash was really sweet. Roasting is going to intensify that sweetness. So I was joking, I have a 2-year-old son, and I was actually joking with him the other day. We were playing, the game, don't eat that, it's don't you dare eat that squash. I was telling him it was candy, because it really is as sweet as candy to me. I really love how sweet butternut squash is. Probably one reason why it's my favorite food. So, it is sweet, so it is a source of, it has naturally occurring sugars and carbohydrates and starches in it, but it also comes with a lot of nutrients. So this orange color that you see, that's beta-carotene, or a form of vitamin A. It's a great source of potassium and other vitamins and minerals. Potassium, again, for athletes, potassium helps with electrolyte balance. But actually, we should all be eating more potassium because it helps to control blood pressure as well. So a lot of times we only think about reducing salt in our diet when controlling blood pressure, but also increasing potassium is important as well. You're doing a great job over there. I'm actually going to sneak around you with my squash, and we're going to just put it all on the cookie sheet. So I don't have a measuring cup in front of me right now, but about 2.5 cups of squash is what you need. So I'm going to estimate that that's about 2.5 cups. And this you can use it for later. You can either bake it, you could steam it, roast it for something else, use it in a soup. And again, you have some of those recipes in front of you for different ways to use squash. Or you could roast it all. I love to make extra of this squash and use it to top a salad or just eat it plain. Again, I love roasted squash. It really is very sweet and delicious. So we'll set that aside for now. And then, how you doing over there?
I'm good.
He looks like they look like all about the same size. He's cutting them up. Not too difficult, doing a great job. We're gonna get our red onion going. You can use any color of onion that you have for this. So if you just have a white onion, that's fine too. I'm just gonna go ahead and get the peel off. And we want to cut the onion. You're roasting it with the squash, so we want it about the same size. Anytime you're roasting vegetables together, you want them the same size so that they cook evenly. Should I make Rick cut an onion?
Why not?
Do you cry generally when you cut onions?
We're going to find out here.
Guess we'll find out. Who wants to see Rick cry?
It hasn't been that kind of day yet.
Hopefully nobody's crying by the time we get done here. So, yep, just about the same size. So just, big chunks. It doesn't have to be perfect. And they're going to cook down a little bit. I'm going to sneak around you again and put those on our cookie sheet. I'm reaching over him with a chef knife. So, all right, so our onions cut. The last thing we need to do is give it a drizzle of olive oil. You need about 2 tablespoons. So I'll let Rick do that. You can either eyeball it or use a measuring spoon, whatever you want to do. I trust you to eyeball it. Rick says that he cooks at home, so.
Well, I love to cook.
I think that's impressive. What kinds of things do you like to make at home for your family?
We like to barbecue. Do a lot
Okay.
of smoking on our smoker.
Okay.
And after that, my wife's more the sides lady.
She does the vegetables and.
Yes. If it were up to me, we'd basically just have meat and potatoes. But apparently there's these other food groups, and she's requiring our kids to eat them. So.
Right. Well, as a cross-country coach, I can see why, because she probably knows that her runners are going to perform better when they eat the vegetables too. So.
She knows everything.
She does. All right, so we have the olive oil on there. I actually, I refrain from putting salt on before I roast because I actually recently read that salt can lower the smoke point of olive oil. And once an oil hits its smoke point, it can create harmful chemicals that aren't really that good for us. So I try to keep my oven temperature a little lower and, you know, cook it a little bit longer if I have to. And I also don't put salt on it until after it's all cooked. How are we doing over here? Okay. So this would go in a 400-degree oven for about 20 minutes, and then it's going to be ready to add to your salad. All right. So I think we're going to take well, I guess we can make the dressing now too. So for the dressing, you're going to be making your own dressing, so it's going to be super, you know, a lot healthier than some that you would get bottled. It's not going to have any chemicals or preservatives added to it. So for the dressing, you're going to be using apple cider vinegar, and that's right here. So we need 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. So I'll have Rick measure that into our bowl. Perfect. And then 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And olive oil has wonderful monounsaturated fats, which are healthy for your heart. So, you know, it's great for using when cooking or in salad dressings. Then we're just going to use a little bit of honey to sweeten it up, and we just need about 1.5 teaspoons, so not a ton. Of course, if you wanted it a little bit sweeter, you could add more, but just a tiny bit. And then the actual recipe calls for just a dash of honey. So I'm not really, I estimated about 1/8 teaspoon, but I'll just have Rick put a dash. Oh, sorry, cinnamon. I'm
busy with the honey. I like it sweet.
Did I say honey? Oh, Rick's adding extra honey behind while I'm not watching.
Not extra. I just want to make sure we get all the honey in there.
Right. And then salt. So again, you can add the salt to taste. Less salt is better for blood pressure regulation. But there's really no other salt in this recipe. The quinoa doesn't have any salt in it unless you get like a seasoned quinoa, which I wouldn't recommend. I would get the plain quinoa. You know, our vegetables only have naturally occurring sodium. I guess our pumpkin seeds and our cheese are the only things that are going to add extra salt other than what we're adding there. So, and then Rick's just going to go ahead and whisk the dressing together. And then we're going to set that aside for a few minutes until our quinoa is cooked.
Smells good.
Okay. So while we're waiting for our quinoa to cook, I want to talk about some different squashes and pumpkins actually too. So Rick said he was familiar with this one. This is a spaghetti squash. So how do you eat spaghetti squash at home?
We basically prepare it, roast it, and use spaghetti sauce.
Put spaghetti sauce on it, right?
I love it that way.
So you can actually use this as a pasta substitute when you bake it. Usually you bake it cut side down with a little bit of water. I like it a little bit crunchy if I'm kind of using it as a pasta substitute, not necessarily softer, because then when it gets softer, it has a really squashy taste when it's...
And it peels right apart like
yeah, it kind of, you
pasta.
Like scrape it with a fork, and it comes right out and it looks like spaghetti. So pasta sauce, or you probably do you do like a meat sauce with it, or?
Yeah, we're a little finicky at our house, just regular
regular tomato sauce. Whatever you prefer. I like to do meatballs with my spaghetti squash, and you know, a lot of times when we eat pasta, it can get pretty high in carbohydrate. You know, everybody likes a good breadstick or garlic bread with their pasta. And for a lot of my patients that have diabetes, that gets to be way too high in carbohydrate when you're eating the pasta and the bread together. But if you were eating spaghetti squash instead of regular pasta, you could go ahead and have your bread along with it, and it'd be a balanced carbohydrate meal. So
make it even healthier using turkey meat?
Yeah, you could. Yep, you can use turkey meat. Or actually, in one of the first Livet presentations that we did, we used chicken, ground chicken. I recently made a pumpkin and chicken meatball. So, you know, squash, another reason why I love it is it can be very versatile. You can use it in a lot of different ways. You can, so pumpkin, we'll talk about pumpkin now. Pumpkin is actually kind of a...
Hello.
It's going to depend on how big the chunk is. Generally about 30 minutes to 45, or until it's fork tender. So you want to take a fork, and when it can go into the squash easily, then it's done. So a pumpkin is another type of a squash, and nothing makes me more sad when the day after Halloween I see everybody's little pumpkins going out to the trash can because you can eat them. They're edible, and they're so nutritious for you. They're great sources of vitamin A. Again, the seeds inside are rich in minerals. Same nutrients as a squash, really. And again, you can use it in so many different ways. You can use it as a pie filling. You can use it in meatballs. I make my kids pumpkin or butternut squash mac and cheese, where I still use a little bit of cheese in there, but I also add squash to give it a little bit of a complex flavor and some extra nutrition. Put it in muffins or pancakes, waffles. You can do so many different things. Smoothies, make a pumpkin pie smoothie or a pumpkin pie popsicle, which you have a recipe for in front of you. And it's actually really good. My kids love it. So super nutritious for you, and you can use it in so many different ways. And if you have extra, I actually cooked a big old pumpkin last night, and I have like 2 casserole dishes full of pureed squash in my refrigerator right now. I have no idea how I'm going to use it, but actually I'm going to have to freeze it because we're never going to be able to eat that much. You can freeze it after it's been cooked too and use it later in different recipes. So yeah, the pumpkin is edible. We waste so much food in America, and it's really sad. Again, I hate to see things like that go to waste when they're so nutritious, and we've already paid for it. So why throw it away if we can use it? So some other unique types of squash. I guess most people probably know what this one is. This one, if you go to the grocery store, you see 3 different types of squash. You see the butternut, you see the spaghetti squash, and this one, the acorn squash. So acorn tends to be pretty popular. You can do some different, this tends to be one that's popular for stuffing. You scrape out the seeds, and growing up I would always stuff it with a sausage, turkey sausage or beef sausage, or I guess not beef, pork. Pork sausage. Again, processed meats aren't that great for us, but that's like a pretty big comfort meal for me. Little meatball, sausage balls inside of a baked acorn squash just screams fall to me. So it's still super nutritious for you. But then there's a lot of other squash varieties out there, and a lot of times people use them for decorating, but they don't know that you can actually eat them too. So this one I found at the farmer's market, and I was actually really sad last night. I was coming up from my basement. I store my squash in my basement where it's dark and cool. And I was coming up from my basement. I had 3 squash in my arms, and I dropped this one on the floor. And I cracked it open. So I've been storing it in the refrigerator. But I wanted to show you guys this really pretty squash. And a lot of people would put this on their table, and then again they'd throw it away. They don't know that they can eat it. This is called a buttercup squash, I believe, and it's really, really sweet. The flesh is a little bit drier than some of the other types of squash. I'm going to cut it open. Since it's already cracked open, I'm gonna cook it tonight. So it's a really deep orange on the inside. And actually, the thing I think is really funny about this squash, I told you I dropped it on the floor and I cracked it open. Last night, like, it was falling apart, but it kind of like mended itself back together. It's really kind of strange. And I was joking before we started, hey, the squash mended itself back together. That's kind of cool. If it's mending itself back together, what's it doing in our bodies? Maybe it's healing our bodies when we eat it. So it's healing itself. So that's what it looks like on the inside. Just a bright orange flesh, and when you cook it, that orange and green just really intensifies, and it's really an appealing addition to your plate. So a squash like this, some squash, they have a really, really tough outer shell, and some are a little bit softer. I think it'd be pretty hard. Plus there's all these different odd shapes in it. It'd be hard to peel with a vegetable peeler, a paring knife. So something like this, I prefer to bake with the skin still on, and then scoop out the flesh after it's been cooked. So super, again, this is going to be a super sweet squash. I actually think it might be sweeter than a butternut. And again, these seeds are all edible on the inside too. So, and then the last one here, this little guy I found at the farmer's market too. This is called a sweet dumpling squash, and it actually, the skin is pretty soft on it, and you can actually eat it. I just cut this one in half and sliced it, and then roasted it in the oven. So, you know, super versatile, and there are so many different kinds out there to pick from. If you're not sure if a squash is edible or not, if you're at like the farmer's market or something, you can always ask the grower. A lot of times they know whether it's edible. That's what I did. Like I said, I had a big pumpkin, and it was like a green, almost a teal pumpkin. And I wasn't sure if it was edible or not, and I asked the grower, and she was able to tell me that, yeah, you could eat it. And it was, you know, gigantic. Again, it's going to feed us. It was like $5, and it's going to feed us for like all winter. So, yeah, lots of fun there. Okay, I think our quinoa is getting close to done here. So I'm going to turn off the heat. It's a little bit liquidy. Maybe I'm going to let it sit just a couple seconds longer with the lid on. Okay. Well, again, I don't think this needs too much longer to cook, and it's looking even more, since I gave it a quick stir, it's looking even more firm. So I'm going to take the lid off actually and just kind of let it sit there for a second. Something else that I really love about this recipe, you can eat it hot, you can eat it at room temperature, or you can eat it cold. Quinoa, you know how rice, like when it gets cold, it's not very good, it tends to get kind of chewy. Quinoa doesn't do that, so it actually tastes pretty good cold. So I guess while we're letting that set, I can cut I'm actually going to put on some gloves here to cut my parsley. That's going to go into the salad too. And other goodies we're going to put in the salad, we have some pepitas, which are actually pumpkin seeds. So everybody, when you're used to seeing a pumpkin seed, like you think of it like this white thing that you see like when you take out a pumpkin. And actually inside the pumpkin seed there's little green seeds. I guess the white part would be the hull and the green part would be the seed. You can eat the hull, that's fine. But in the store, generally when you buy pumpkin seeds, you buy them as pepitas, and they're a little bit more tender and flavorful. And we're also going to be putting some dried cherries into this salad. You could also use craisins or dried cranberries depending on what you prefer. Cranberries are definitely a little bit less expensive than the cherries, so if you're on a budget, use the cranberries instead. And then as a topping, we're going to be using, I think this is actually feta cheese. Your recipe calls for goat cheese or I think chèvre. I guess I didn't write it there. Yeah. Chèvre, but it's goat cheese, and the true goat cheese is actually a little bit creamier than feta, which I like. I like that in a salad, and feta tends to have a really salty, bitey flavor, so I like actual goat cheese better, and you can find that at almost any store. I bought, to throw in something local, I bought a type of goat cheese from Turkey Foot Creek Creamery, which is in Wauseon, and they sold it at Chief. So that's what I recently bought when I bought some goat cheese, and it was really good. So you can use that. So now that this has kind of stopped steaming a little bit, we're going to dump this into our giant bowl. And obviously we don't have an onion here in our test kitchen, so we graciously had our hospital kitchen roast us up some butternut squash and onion. So I'll have Rick be my dumper. He can dump that in. Hasn't Rick done a great job today? I mean, he just cut everything so perfectly. Okay, I guess that's good. And then our cherries. Oops, and I never chopped our parsley. I got talking and never chopped the parsley. And then you can add the pumpkin seeds as well, and then the dressing. And the fresh parsley just adds a little bit of green and freshness to the salad. Plus it adds a lot of antioxidants. A lot of people think of parsley as just a garnish, but you should really actually eat it because it's loaded with antioxidants and anti-inflammatory and all sorts of different properties. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in there. I believe it is 1/4 cup of parsley, but you could add more or less to taste. And I'll let Rick give that a stir. So it
smells delicious.
Yeah, so the hot quinoa mixing with everything is really making it very aromatic, probably.
It is. You can smell.
So a couple different ways you could eat this. You could have it as a side dish, and it'd be great to take to your Thanksgiving gatherings or Christmas. A lot of different Thanksgiving flavors in there with the squash, pumpkin seeds, savory onion, honey, cinnamon. You know, all those are very traditional Thanksgiving flavors. You could serve it as a side dish at home, or I actually ate it as a main dish. Like I said, I love squash, and this would be like the perfect meal for me. This is my ideal meal. So I served it over a bed of lettuce, nice bright greens, and I probably ate a little bit bigger portion size than the cup that it calls for. But that was our vegetarian meal. So if you're looking for a meatless Monday dish, this would be a good option. So I served it over the lettuce, and you want it to be cooler if you're going to do that. And then I sprinkled the cheese on top. And
so the cheese doesn't go in it. The cheese gets sprinkled on after.
Yeah, I like to wait until the very end and sprinkle the cheese on top. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that now. So I don't really like. So when you put the cheese on a salad, if you have any leftovers and the cheese kind of sits in there, it kind of gets a funny taste. I don't like that, so I just kind of sprinkle it on top right before I serve it. So, but that's up to you. If you want to mix it in, you can certainly do that too, if you don't mind the taste that it gets. So that's it. That's our butternut squash quinoa salad. Does anybody have any questions at all about anything that we've cooked today, or about squash or quinoa or anything?
Andrea,
Yeah.
If a recipe calls for pumpkin seeds,
Mm-hmm.
do you think they're pepitas or?
Probably the pepitas.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm sure you could use the pumpkin seeds. Like if you had roasted pumpkin seeds, it just depends on the type of recipe you're putting it in. But most likely the pepitas. That's what I usually see. And they're definitely easiest to find in the grocery store.
That was my problem, trying to find pumpkin seeds.
And you're like, these are green. These aren't pumpkin seeds.
Thanks.
Right. Any other questions?
When you do that roasted squash, do you
Yeah.
eat it cold, or can you eat it cold, or is it?
You could. Yeah, you could eat it cold. Like I said, I like to put it, like the roasted squash like this, where it's in cubes, I like to put that on salads plain. I'll make kind of a honey mustard vinaigrette with Dijon mustard, olive oil. I use red wine vinegar in that recipe, a little honey, salt and pepper, and that's pretty much all I do. Whisk it together. And I'll toss that with my greens and then serve a roasted squash and onions on top of it with a little bit of goat cheese. Again, goat cheese goes really well with squash. So, and that you would generally want to be cold. So, any other questions on how to prepare squash? Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, sometimes squash can get a little bit difficult to cut. So if you're having a hard time with it, you can use the microwave to help you cut through a squash. So if I was going to use a microwave for this squash, what I do is I would take a knife or a fork and stab some holes in it to help it vent, and then pop it in your microwave for about a minute. Take it out, kind of check it, pop it in a minute longer until it's manageable to cut. You're not going to soften it completely while it's whole, but you can at least get it more manageable to get the knife through. So that's a good option if you're having a hard time or just not quite awkward sometimes to cut. Any other questions? Thank you so much, Rick. I'll take off my glove. Thanks for helping me out today.
Awesome. Are we going to
Yeah. So our audience, if you'd like to sample the quinoa salad, it is ready for sampling, and I think we have some volunteers that are going to serve it up for us. So